Well, hello everyone. My name is Betsy Brick and I'm the Development Director of Early Music Seattle, and I'm coming to you from my apartment downtown today and am delighted to be joined by our artistic partner and composer Aaron Grad, who created a beautiful piece of music in collaboration with poet and librettist Jennifer Bullis called Honey Sweet We Sing For You, that retells the story of the sirens from the sirens' point of view. And this piece was originally scheduled to be part of a Seattle Baroque Orchestra concert this month that has now become the centerpiece for a virtual artistic production created by a gifted group of local artists called For All Our Sisters, that, to quote in Aaron's own words, weaves together music, poetry, and dance to help us understand the powerful women in our collective past and present, especially those whose voices have been silenced by history's mostly male gatekeepers and myth makers. It's so great to see you, Aaron. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for doing this, Betsy.
So before we dive in, I would love to explore this exciting collaborative project in greater depth, but I first would like to talk about when you first discovered your love of music and how it has led to a deep and rich relationship with it throughout your life. So what is your first memory of being touched or inspired by music?
Wow, okay, I have to go way back. I've been thinking about it a lot because I have a 2.5-year-old son. And there's so much, we do so much singing and dancing and playing around, and it reminds me that there was so much of that in my childhood. So I don't think there was a time in my life before music was part of me. And I'm remembering back to the kinds of campfire songs and strumming along kinds of things that were always part of my early music. Maybe the most important formative influence was I really fell in love with early musicals like Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers musicals. Mm-hmm. I had an older sister who was really into music theater. Both my parents were really into that kind of stuff, and we'd watch the movies, and I loved the songs and fell in love with all those songs by George Gershwin and Irving Berlin, the great American songwriters. And so my musical path took me through that corner of music. I ended up being a jazz guitar major. I've always loved the canon of American songs. I've always had a very blurry line between composing, songwriting. I write words, I write music, and I've kind of entered this back door of concert music, of classical music, and even early music through that framework. It's made a lot of sense because I'm an improviser at heart as a jazz musician, and I have a certain way of seeing a template for music and then leaving space for myself and for others to find their way through it. And I've really found so many kindred spirits in the early music world. So I've been writing notated concert music for my whole adult life, but it's really been in about the last 10 years, I've found my people in early music and have had a bunch of projects that have touched that some way or another.
Wonderful. So does early music open kind of a broader window for you to be able to do this kind of improvisation than like traditional classical music does? Does it offer something different than that?
It offers a few things. One, there's an ethos in early music that believes in honoring a composer's intentions to the fullest extent possible, and that there is a purity and a transcendence in following the composer down whatever rabbit hole he or she has gone down. And so whether that has to do with the instruments and the period practices, or in this case, writing new music for an early music ensemble, I find a level of commitment to honoring that vision, my vision in this case, or a collaborative vision with a librettist. I really love that. And there are improvisatory aspects in the music and opportunities for extra color and extra flourish that would not really fit in a romantic 19th century style concert music. And so for all of those reasons, we get along well.
So you have quite an extensive artistic background, not only as a musician, but a composer as well. In fact, a few seasons back, you premiered a piece called Strange Seasons, which was based on Vivaldi's Four Seasons. And you introduced Seattle to a new instrument you invented called the electric theorbo that was played by Seattle Baroque Orchestra's theorboist, there's a tongue twister for you, John Lenti. So tell me about this latest composition, Honey Sweet, We Sing for You. What was the inspiration for this piece of music, and how did the idea come about to have this center around the story of the sirens, voicing it from their point of view?
Sure. I have to go back a few years. I started thinking about it as the first wave of Me Too information and outrage was starting to boil over, and just recognizing that there were so many stories that I had bought into, that I had corroborated in my own way as a man in this society, and just ways that I had it totally wrong. And I think in particular, as I was hearing versions of stories where rich, powerful men had some version of an explanation to say, I couldn't help myself, or she was leading me there, some version of that. I had this image of the sirens, that this is the same story that it's been for thousands of years, that these powerful sailors can't help themselves as they pass by a seductive voice, that allure. And whatever happens from that point on isn't their responsibility, because how could they possibly ignore the siren call? And it just got me thinking that story, which I'd always loved the Siren Myth. I thought it was a kind of a beautiful myth, and I loved that it's a musical myth. And I just took it at face value. And as I started to question stories of, Harvey Weinstein and Charlie Rose and whoever else I was hearing about, and people closer to home, and all of it, just really reassessing what it means to be a responsible and healthy man in our society, I realized I don't want to be one of those sailors anymore. And I want to understand what's really going on in that dynamic, because it cannot possibly be the story that Homer told in the Odyssey that we've all bought into for thousands of years. So that led me on this hunt for the truth and a deeper truth. And I knew I couldn't be the one to find it. I needed help. I needed a collaborator. And I went looking for someone. I started with some people I knew and realized I didn't quite have the right person. And so I went down to Elliott Bay Bookstore and started browsing poetry anthologies. This was not long after the election. And there was a volume that had just come out called Nasty Women Poets, an amazing volume. I highly recommend it. And it was organized in these thematic categories, including a category on mythology. And I absolutely fell in love with a poem that I found in there by this poet who happened to live just up the road in Bellingham.
Oh, wow.
And I just reached out. I found her online and got in touch, and we started talking and had these amazing long-ranging conversations about mythology and art and gender and all of it, and really just found each other as great collaborators, dedicated not just to creating this one piece of music, but to really try to do the work to figure out what are we trying to find here. And she went deep, deep, deep into the mythological background and other sources from Greece and Rome that we don't normally think of around the sirens, and found this much more nuanced story to figure out what are these sirens really singing about. And so that became the genesis of this piece. And once I had the idea for a piece, then we just had to find a willing partner. And luckily, Early Music Seattle has been so open-minded, and we had such fun with that concerto you mentioned, Strange Seasons. And
yes,
it was so gratifying to have that door opened quite easily as I brought this idea to the leadership team, to Gus and Alex, and we started to run with it. The world is very different from where we started, but it still resonates and makes a lot of sense. And it's been really fun to build a whole world around that one piece, that one idea.
absolutely. And it just shows the beauty and versatility of early music. And it's such an interesting fusion of something that is so old that yet can still be new. And
I particularly wanted this, to write this cantata. It is a cantata in the true sense that it's one singer, it's a soprano with a small Baroque ensemble. It's flute, violin, and continuo, which is made up of, it'll probably be cello, harpsichord, and theorbo when we all come back together. And that's a formula, that's a template that would be very familiar to Seattle Baroque fans. There is so much great music from around 1700, from Italy and from France. and other places. Handel was a great composer of those cantatas. And so that framework, which already has these associations, it has centuries of history attached to it, and it has familiarity as a pathway to deliver these messages of mythology. And there are so many great cantatas of these women suffering, mourning, weeping. That's very much part of the cantata tradition. And so that is also part of what made early music a great framework for this, is that I wasn't trying to act as if this is a whole new way of presenting a story. I wanted to use an access point that people could probably identify with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So this piece, I believe, was the catalyst for this larger project for All Our Sisters. Tell me more about the creation of this and the group of artists that came together to bring this to life.
Sure. I'll say that the title for All Our Sisters is a quote from the libretto that Jennifer wrote for Honey Sweet We Sing for You. And the spoiler alert, the hook of the whole piece, what we discover in this retelling of the Sirens, is that they're not actually trying to lure sailors. They're singing for their lost sister, Persephone, who was abducted by Hades. And the Sirens are her sisters. They're her handmaidens, her musical attendants. And they're turned into birds, and they go flying off to look for her and to sing for her. And as Jennifer fleshed out this libretto, she really made it a story of not just singing for this one sister, Persephone, but that they sing for all our sisters who have been hurt, who have been taken, who have been silenced. And so that quote really spoke to us as a framework for the whole program. Mm-hmm. I worked with Alex Weimann and Gus to figure out what music from the Baroque tradition, the Baroque canon, resonates. And it was quite easy to find cantatas. We picked a cantata by a French composer that I particularly love, the composer Monteclair, and it's a telling of Pan and Syrinx, another great myth about a female character whose fate comes out badly as she's pursued by Pan, and yet she becomes, in a way, the source of music, the root of the flute, the musical instrument. Her very body becomes the flute. That made a ton of sense to put that on the program. I had the idea that there's a modern piece that I've always loved, a piece by Debussy for solo flute called Syrinx, which is dealing with the exact same myth through a very different musical language. But when the two are put together, they actually resonate and amplify each other in quite striking and natural ways. I mean, it seems like a match that, how has this never happened before? Maybe it has. And also there's a French composer from the same era, a woman whose music I've discovered recently that I really love, Elisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. And she wrote a cantata on the myth of Semele, another one of these very fascinating Greek myths. Semele was a lover of Zeus, whose life also ended in tragedy because of being entangled with this powerful male god. And that made a lot of sense to put on the program and to have another woman's voice represented, a female composer. And so it was just these puzzle pieces that all started to come together. Mm-hmm. I think it was Gus's idea that we needed sort of a guiding voice, almost like an oracle to take us through this whole journey. And he suggested a poet who I love so much, Claudia Castro Luna. She was actually one of the very first people I contacted about this project years before it even came to Early Music Seattle. And she wasn't available to collaborate at that point at the version we were envisioning. And it just is such perfect kismet that it all cycled back around to bring her in. And she's writing new poetry that again amplifies these themes and contextualizes them in our modern culture. I've read one of her poems so far, and it is so, it's spine tingling how it connects these millennia of patterns of the way society operates and draws all the connections together that I always sort of knew were there, but didn't quite know how to bring it together. And she's added so much with that. She also had the idea to bring in another element, a collaborator of hers, the dancer Milvia Pacheco. And it makes so much sense to add this physical embodied component because this project is not just about women's voices, but it's about all of women, about the experience of the embodied life of being a woman and all that must entail that I'm still trying to make sense of. And it was so great to have her come in. And so this team just keeps growing. And as we've been meeting on Zoom and trying to figure out how to do this, not in person, ideas are just flying all over the place and sparking new collaborations and new things we can do together. And so we have a very strong nucleus. We have an idea about bringing women's voices out of the shadows and out of this subjugation that they've been have forced upon them. And we have really creative people, and the alchemy of that idea and those people has just been magical.
Oh, that's wonderful. So in the introduction you wrote about the For All Our Sisters project, you mentioned gatekeepers and myth makers who have silenced women's voices historically. Who would you say are these figures in history? And are they still in evidence today?
Well, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Homer is a starting point. You know, these early tellers of mythology, these are through a male gaze, through a male lens. And I am just, you know, in my recent adult life trying to make sense of what does that come with? What privilege, what bias, what preconceptions, and even when done with no ill intention, the stories get distorted. They get twisted up. And I do believe that us men, we are limited in our ability to fully tell stories that aren't our own. I'm not of the school that would say I don't even have any right to write for a woman's voice because I'm not a woman. I mean, I think part of the beauty of making music together is how much I learned from trying to inhabit that voice and put myself through that vehicle. And it's humbling, and it's very edifying for me. And I hope I come at it with the spirit of humility and openness and collaboration. And so it's not to say that men have no role in being part of these stories, but I mean, where is it not happening? I mean, I was just on a call a couple days ago with arts leaders, and we're trying to figure out how to come out of this pandemic stronger and revitalized. And it was really striking to see that the men in that virtual room were talking more and talking louder. And the people that I invited onto that call, there were more men than women because I'm a man and I tend to know more men and I have a certain maybe connection there. These are all, it's everywhere. We're all part of it. We can, I'm just trying to own my little piece and learn from it. And it is, I mean, I can't think of anywhere where this doesn't happen. This is life, but this is what we're doing. I had a really nice email exchange with the poet Claudia recently, and just really, I was really inspired after her poem, and I was writing her back and forth about it. And she said something about, this is how oppression gets overturned bit by bit, millennium by millennium. And we just do it. We do our part. And so that's a loose paraphrase, but that was my takeaway of just, this is the reality we live in, and we're going to do the work.
Right. Absolutely. And this is an amazing opportunity to do just that and to make strides moving forward now that we're sort of going through a global reset. It's a chance to really look at things from a new perspective and see how we can address some of these things that have been hiding in the shadows, that are now coming into the light. So it's wonderful that you're shining the light on this topic and, having people open their minds to look at it from a different perspective. So who are the female voices you have been the most influenced by from the past and present?
My wife, above all. She's my collaborator, my teammate, my first listener and reader on everything. And the person who helped me grow up. We've been together since we were 21 years old.
Oh, wow.
Her above all, Jen. And, from a musical perspective and an artistic perspective, this project, as we've been doing different videos and things, it's brought me to some of the people from my past, the musicians who really touched me. I did an arrangement of a Joni Mitchell song in one of my videos, arrangement of her song, Both Sides Now, which is such a great fit because it's all about seeing things with fresh eyes. I also just did a little electronic soundtrack, remixing some improvised recordings for a dance piece that Milvia recorded. And it reminded me how indebted I am to Björk, the Icelandic singer, songwriter, and composer, as I was working with these kind of disembodied women's voices and creating rhythmic tracks and things like that. And so those are two very, very substantial influences for me. Again, I think of them as great composers. I don't think they get a lot of credit as that, but they are highly original, emotive, authentic voices that speak to me. I guess those are the two that come to mind right now.
So what is it about these women that makes such a strong impression on you? What are the qualities that they possess, would you say?
Just the two that I've just mentioned, Joni Mitchell and Björk. I guess I just would say authenticity. Their voices are unique, weird in some ways, but they have written music and delivered it in ways that to my ear just follow their truth, their inner truth, their emotional truth, the sonic truth of who they are, and takes that as far as it can go, letting that inner muse, that inner truth be the guide. Really no concern in what I hear of their music for taste and trends and any of that, just a trust in themselves and in the people they're engaging with, that they will follow them step by step.
Great. So what is it that you hope people leave with after seeing this diverse collection of music, poetry, and dance that shines the light on the influence, significance, and importance of women and women's voices from the past and present?
I hope it wakes people up. I hope it unstops their ears. That's in the myth of the sirens, the way that the sailors get safely past the sirens is they have to shove beeswax in their ears. And Ulysses, Odysseus tells them to do that. He says, put the wax in your ear so you don't get lured. Tie me to the mast so I can hear it because I want to hear it, but that way I won't jump off the ship. And so I want people to unstop their ears. That's one of the lines in Jennifer's libretto as well, to be willing to hear it, hear the truth, hear it in a different way than you've been willing to hear it. I hope it brings people's attention that there are a lot of stories out there that we just continue to buy into from inertia and momentum. And I think at its best, music can have this sense of invigoration and awakening in our bodies and in our spirits and in our minds. And I hope this can unite all of those. And we're trying to come at it from every sense possible. There's sound, there's words, there's dance, there's movement, it's all of it. I hope everyone can find a way in and learn and grow and talk about it and share it and keep coming back for more. I guess that's all all I can think about lately as we're finishing this project up is where do we go next? How do we keep this way of seeing the world and using music and creativity as a lens to a deeper truth? How do we keep the team alive? That's all I'm thinking about right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's all I have. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to add before we sign off?
I just really have to express my gratitude. This has been a team effort, and I had a little germ of an idea years ago, but that would have been nothing. It would have gone nowhere, and it would have touched no one, very few people on my own. And so I just feel such gratitude for Early Music Seattle, for all of you on the staff and the great musicians who've been part of this. And it's also about support from the subscribers and the donors and the board. And I know all of you have taken risks to have a more expansive view of what your discipline, your art form can mean and what it can do. And you've taken chances on me and on other people who are challenging some old notions. And so I just am extremely grateful for everyone, the entire village that made this happen on both sides of the creative act.
Well, thank you for being part of our village, Aaron. We just love having you as part of it, and just look forward to what we're going to be able to do, you know, as time unfolds, because I think you're right. We've just scratched the surface and there's a lot more to explore. So it's a wonderful adventure we're all on.
It sure is. Well, thank you. I'm honored and excited for whatever comes next.
Well, great. Well, we'll look forward to being able to share all of these amazing artistic pieces that are going to be coming together to form sort of this kaleidoscope around this For All Our Sisters project. And so thank you for taking time to speak with us about it today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
All right. You take care.
You too.